This week we're looking at Iran's ballistic missile program. Quite different to the Iran nuclear deal that we are aware of, the international agreement negotiated between Iran, Russia, China, the US and European Union nations, looking at the rate at which Iran and its government enriches uranium in exchange for the lifting of sanctions and reintegration into the international community and the international economy. Now, Iran's ballistic missiles program has been criticised by France along with other European countries such as Germany, and also the US have used it as a pretext to undermine the separate nuclear agreement. Now, why is it important? Well, there's a general feeling from European countries and the US as well as their allies in the region, the Gulf, being Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, that Iran's nuclear deal is simply a poorly negotiated deal by which the government of Iran can use its ballistic missiles program to forward its nuclear ambitions by developing these ballistic missiles and adding nuclear warheads on top of them. It's also perceived that the development of this ballistic missiles program is an aggressive move, which supplements the fact that Iran has been so effective at using its proxies throughout the region, expanding Iranian influence at the expense of Saudi Arabia. But let's consider the alternative and the opposing side as put forward by Iran's foreign minister. For one thing, Iran considers its missile program to be fundamentally defensive. Now, we can understand this if we widen out the context from the usual Reuters headlines of Iran tests a new missile to understanding the context of the wider region. We have a region in which almost every other state within the Persian Gulf is allied to a Western country which supplies those nations such as Saudi Arabia, Iran's rival, United Arab Emirates, with huge amounts of equipment, whether it be air defence equipment, but especially offensive aircraft as well. And from an Iranian perspective, the development of their indigenous missile program is first and foremost about defence. This makes much more sense when we consider the historical frame by which the Iranians perceive actions within the region. The Iraq-Iran war saw Saddam Hussein launch an offensive against Iranian cities with Scud missiles which devastated Iranian airfields but also inflicted untold damage upon Iranian civilians, and this is with the tacit approval of the West as well as several Arab states. At the same time, until this day, Iran has been suffering under huge amounts of sanctions, meaning that it could never buy weapons in order to defend itself. So it had to be rather ingenious in terms of developing, cannibalizing from other parts of previous bought military equipment from the West, but also developing its own indigenous defensive programs. And this missile ballistic program is part of Iran's attempt to be able to create a deterrent against those actors in the region, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates among some, who they feel would wish to attack Iran.
In the past 300 years, Iran has only defended itself and defended itself in a most valiant way. You remember when Saddam Hussein attacked Iran? Most of you do not want to remember that. When Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, everybody provided him with weapons. Nobody even provided Iran with the means of defense. And you ask us why we develop our missiles? How do we defend ourselves?
If we also consider the track record of nations in the region, although Iran is very successful at using its proxies or its allies such as Hezbollah, and they have in many ways been a lot more effective, you could look at the Iranian perspective as being borne out by, for example, the Saudi campaign in Yemen, with the Saudis having the longer track record of aggression in the region. As a side note, if we look at the figures and the way that they bear out, they tell a story in themselves. The United Arab Emirates has a military budget of at 2016 of around about £23.5 billion. The Saudis have a military budget in the region of £63 billion. The Iranians, of course, are more effective in the way that they are able to do more with less across the region, and that is a debate that has to be had in terms of Iranian influence. But if we just look at the figures, Iran's military budget was somewhere between 12 and 16 billion, depend on who you speak to. Think tanks tend to differ. However, new figures, when we look at the budget that's going to be put forward next March, show that the Iranians are reducing the amount of spend that they put on aircraft as well as conventional ground forces. In fact, the military budget is going to go from 12 billion down to 10.3 billion, again showing the trajectory going in the opposite direction, away from aggression towards defence, Iran being primarily a defensive force in the region. Others would disagree, looking at actors such as Hezbollah, looking at the intervention in Syria, as well as the Iraqi militias in Iraq. There are think tank experts from organisations such as the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies, our favourite war-lusty think tank, which state that Iran developing its ballistic missiles programme contravenes, and I quote, the spirit of the Iran deal. Now, that spirit hasn't really been emphasised or put down in writing, but it's the idea that either party needs to conduct themselves within the context of the deal in a manner that promotes stability, peace, and a degree of trust and friendship that can be fostered between both sides. But that can be countered when we look at the behaviour of the Trump administration in trying to find any way to get out of its obligations re the Iran deal. But they also point to the fact that there are some limitations in terms of the range of missiles that Iran can develop. If we look recently to the Khorram Shah missile, that has a range of something like 2,000 kilometres. And of course, if you're sitting in Riyadh or anywhere else in the Middle East and you happen to be a regional rival of Iran, that's going to be a cause for concern. Now, Iran would say that its ballistic missiles program is really in response to an intensive increase in spending by members of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, led by its regional rival Saudi Arabia, and that of course it has the right to defend itself. Europe, the United States, Russia and China need to ask themselves serious and honest questions about who is escalating this arms race within the region. One of the problems we find about the way the media has reported this in the West, as well as how European and American political messengers and communicators have responded to Iran's missile program, has been the uneven way in which our allies in the region are treated and a country like Iran. If we look at the Saudi campaign against Yemen, which this week ended its 1000th day, there was virtual silence over it, maybe secret phone calls with no effect. And yet Iran puts forward a reasonable position that it is being defensive, especially given its history regarding the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam's offensive, and the West's support of that. The public need to be taught a history of what has gone on in the region, and it's vital that the political class and the media are honest about the wider context in which these developments are taking place.